He washed up on her land with the tide of the desert, broken, hunted, and speaking a language no one in the Arizona Territory understood. They called him a savage, a fugitive, a ghost. But Eliza Mayhew, a woman trapped by her father's debts and stalked by a greedy land baron, saw something else. He couldn't speak her language, he couldn't tell her his name, and he couldn't explain the gunshot wound in his side. But in a world of liars, thieves, and silver-tongued devils, he was the only man who couldn't lie. And his eyes told her every promise a man could make. The dust in the Arizona Territory didn't just settle, it invaded. It coated Eliza Mayhew's throat, gathered in the folds of her worn calico dress, and painted a layer of gritty brown over the photograph of her mother and father on the mantel. The High Lonesome Ranch, as her father had ironically named it, was now hers, and it was little more than 200 acres of stubborn dirt, a failing well, and the only year-round water source in the county, Perdition Creek. That creek was the reason Barnaby Judicious wouldn't leave her alone. "Miss Mayhew," he had said just yesterday, his large frame blocking the sun from her doorway, his voice a thick syrup of false concern. He ran the massive J.U. ranch that bordered her property, and he had been buying up smaller homesteads for a decade. Hers was the last. "A woman alone. This land is too hard. The drought is coming. You're holding on to sentiment." "I'm holding on to what's mine, Mr. Judicious," Eliza had said, her voice quiet but firm. Her father had taught her to shoot, to ride, and to never, ever buckle. Judicious's smile was a thin, unpleasant line. His foreman, a man with hollow eyes and a permanent sneer named Silas Vole, had spat tobacco juice onto the porch. "Sentiment don't fill a belly," Vole had rasped, "and it don't stop a man from taking what he needs." "That'll be all, Silas," Judicious said, his eyes never leaving Eliza's. "I'm offering you a fair price, $500, cash." It was an insult. The land with the creek was worth 10 times that. "The answer is no, Mr. Judicious, now and forever. Good day." She had shut the door on his darkening face, the slam echoing the hollow beat of her own heart. She was terrified. She had 6 bullets for her father's Winchester and $40 left to last until it was gone. It was 2 days later, while checking the weak fence line down by the creek, that her life fractured. The air was still, thick with the metallic scent of oncoming heat. Her horse, a sway-backed gelding named Patches, snorted and shied, pulling back from the dense thicket of salt cedars near the water. "Easy, boy." "What is it?" Eliza whispered, sliding the Winchester from its scabbard. She heard it then. A low groan, like an animal caught in a trap. Parting the sharp branches, Eliza froze. It was a man. He was lying face down in the shallow mud, one arm flung out, his hand clutching a clump of reeds. His dark hair was matted with blood and alkali dust. His shirt, a strange, collarless garment of coarse blue linen, was torn and soaked. A dark, ugly stain spread across his ribs. Her first instinct, the one Judicious and Vole had hammered into her, was to run. He was trouble. He was death. But her father's voice whispered in her ear, "You don't leave a man to die, Eliza. Not even a dog." With a strength born of desperation and hard labor, she rolled him over. He was young, perhaps 30. His face was all sharp angles and high cheekbones, covered in a dark stubble. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. The wound in his side was a ragged tear, a bullet graze that had taken a deep chunk of flesh. It was infected, hot to the touch. She looked around. No horse, no canteen, no hat. He had come from nowhere. It took her nearly an hour. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She hauled him onto Patches, wincing as he groaned and tied him to the saddle horn. She walked beside the horse, her rifle at the ready, her eyes scanning the ridgeline. Had Judicius's men done this? Was it Apaches? Or something else entirely? Back in the small two-room cabin, she eased him onto her father's cot. She lit the lamp, the yellow light casting deep shadows across his face. He was burning with fever. For hours she worked. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, the last of her father's bottle, stitching it closed with a needle and thread she'd sterilized in the fire. He thrashed and cried out, but the words were not words at all. They were a torrent of harsh, guttural sounds she had never heard. She forced broth and willow bark tea between his cracked lips. She sat in the one wooden chair, the Winchester across her lap, and watched him fight. He woke just before dawn. His eyes snapped open, and they were not the dull, fevered eyes of the man she'd found. They were a startling, intense blue, the color of a mountain lake, and they were filled with a wild, cornered animal terror. He launched himself off the cot, shouting those strange, explosive words. He saw her and the rifle and froze. He staggered, his hand flying to his bandaged side, his back hitting the rough plank wall. "Easy," Eliza said softly, holding her hand up, palm out. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe." He just stared. His eyes darted from her face, to the rifle, to the door, to the wound on his side, and back to her. There was no flicker of understanding, not a single spark. He didn't understand easy. He didn't understand safe. She pointed to herself. "Eliza." He watched her, his breathing harsh. She pointed to the cot. "Bed. Sleep. You're hurt." Nothing. He was a wall, a terrified, dangerous wall. She sighed, frustration mixing with a strange pity. She put the rifle down on the table, a clear 10 feet away from him. A gesture of trust. "Water?" she tried, holding up the dipper. He watched her, unmoving. She dipped it in the bucket and held it out. He tracked the movement, his muscles tensed to spring. She set the dipper on the floor near him and backed away. He stared at the water for a long minute, then at her. His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. Slowly, painfully, he bent and snatched the dipper, drinking greedily. When he was done, he slumped back against the wall, his chest heaving. His eyes met hers again. The terror was still there, but beneath it was a profound, bottomless exhaustion. And something else. A flicker of cautious assessment. He was looking at her, in her, as if trying to read the lines of her face like a map. He couldn't speak her language. He couldn't tell her who he was, or who had shot him. But as the first light of dawn painted the cabin grey, he gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't surrender. It was an acknowledgement. A truce. And in his eyes, shadowed by pain, she saw the first glint of something she hadn't seen in this valley for a very long time. A promise. Not of words or of gold, but of presence. "I am here." For now it was enough. The first few days were a tense, silent ballet. Eliza moved about her chores with a new, sharp awareness. The stranger, she had no name for him, watched everything. He had moved from the wall to the cot, his fever finally breaking on the second day. He was weak, but his eyes were constantly in motion, cataloguing every object in the cabin, every sound from outside. Eliza learned his habits. He ate little, but with a desperate, hidden hunger, as if ashamed to be taking her food. She'd place a bowl of corn mush and molasses on the floor, and he would wait until her back was turned before retrieving it. She spoke to him constantly, knowing he couldn't understand the words, but hoping the tone would soothe him. "The well's running low," she'd say, pulling on her boots. "I have to check the snares, or we don't eat tonight." He would just watch, his gaze unblinking. On the 4th day, he stood. He was shaky, but his raw-boned frame, now that it wasn't limp, showed surprising power. He walked to the cabin door and looked out at the vast, sun-baked expanse of her ranch. He breathed in the dry air, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than fear or pain. It looked like sorrow. "It's not much," Eliza said, coming to stand a few feet behind him. "But it's home." He turned to her. He pointed to himself. "Casimir." The word was rough, the syllables foreign. Eliza's breath caught. "Casimir," she repeated. The name felt strange and strong on her tongue. He nodded, a sharp, definite motion. She pointed to herself again. "Eliza." "Elizar," he tested, his voice a low rumble. It was the first time he had tried. A fragile bridge was built. The next day, she found him outside, pale and sweating, attempting to chop wood. He was clumsy, his wound clearly pulling, but he was stubborn. "No!" she cried, running over. "You'll tear your stitches! Stop!" He didn't understand stop, so she grabbed the axe from his hands. He let it go, but his frustration was plain. He gestured to the small pile of wood, then to her, then to his own chest. "I can help. Let me help." "You're hurt," she insisted, pointing to his bandage. "Sit. Sit." She pointed to the porch step and pushed lightly on his shoulder. He finally understood. He sat, his face grim. He watched her chop the wood, his gaze analytical. He was not a man used to being idle. The real test came a week later. The old water pump for the kitchen garden, a finicky piece of machinery her father had cursed daily, finally gave a metallic groan and died. Eliza spent an hour working on it, her knuckles skinned, tears of pure frustration welling in her eyes. Without this water, her vegetables would die. And without the vegetables, she threw the wrench down with a clang. "Damn it all!" Casimir, who had been watching from the porch, walked over. He was moving better now, his wound healing cleanly. He stood over the pump, looking at it. Eliza, tired and angry, snapped, "What? You think you can fix it? It's broken, like everything else." He ignored her tone. He motioned for the wrench. "Be my guest," she muttered, kicking it toward him. For the next 2 hours he worked. He didn't just tinker. He disassembled the entire mechanism with a careful, precise economy of motion. He laid the pieces out on a piece of sackcloth in the exact order he removed them. He found the problem, a small, sheared pin and a blockage of rust and sand. He studied the broken pin, looked around the yard, and walked to the dilapidated woodshed. Eliza followed. He sifted through a coffee can of her father's old bolts and nails. He found a thick nail, and using the forge and anvil, he began to work. He didn't hammer wildly. He heated the metal, tapping it with a craftsman's patience, shaping it. He was a blacksmith or something like it. When he was done, he had fashioned a new pin. He returned to the pump and, with the same meticulous care, reassembled it. He looked at Eliza, gestured to the handle and nodded. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. She gripped the handle and pushed down. There was a sucking sound, a gurgle, and then a beautiful, clear stream of water poured into the trough. Eliza gasped, staring at the water, then at him. He was watching her, his face impassive, but his eyes were lit with a quiet satisfaction. You fixed it," she whispered. She was so overwhelmed she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She did neither. She just looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just a burden. He wasn't just a fugitive. He was a man who could build, who could protect. He saw the gratitude in her face. He gave another of his small, rare nods. He had kept a promise his eyes had made. "I will not be useless." Their silent routine was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats. Eliza's blood ran cold. Casimir, hearing the tension in the air, instantly melted into the shadow of the woodshed, his hand gripping the handle of the wood axe. Barnaby Judicious and Silas Vole rode into the yard. "Miss Mayhew!" Judicious called, his voice booming with false cheer. He stopped his horse, his eyes immediately landing on the functioning pump and the trough full of water. His gaze narrowed. "Seems you've had some help. I thought that pump was broken." "I managed," Eliza said, stepping in front of the woodshed, her hands trembling. Silas Vole was scanning the property, his eyes like a hawk's. "Heard you had company, ma'am. Someone saw you dragging a body back here last week. Figured we'd check if you was in any trouble." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eliza lied, her throat dry. "Is that right?" Vole's gaze locked onto the woodshed. "Who's in there?" Before Eliza could answer, Casimir stepped out. He wasn't holding the axe. His hands were open at his sides. He knew, instinctively, that a weapon would be a provocation. He simply stood, tall and unreadable, and stared at the two men. Judicious's eyebrows shot up. "Well now, who is this?" Vole scrutinized Casimir. His eyes raked over the man's high cheekbones, his foreign-cut trousers, his silence. "He's my cousin," Eliza stammered, the lie tasting like ash. "From back east. He's a mute. He's here to help me with the ranch." Judicious and Vole exchanged a look. Vole's thin lips twisted into a cruel smile. "A mute, you say? From back east?" He looked at Casimir's hands, calloused, stained, but with a fineness to the fingers. He looked at his boots, which were not cowboy boots, but strange, calf-high leather. "He don't look like any cousin I've ever seen," Vole said softly. "He's my blood," Eliza said, with more force than she felt. "And this is my land. I'll thank you to leave." Judicious held up a hand. "Easy, Miss Mayhew. Just paying a neighborly call." He looked at Casimir, his eyes cold and calculating. "You, mute. You understand me?" Casimir's expression did not change. He just stared, his blue eyes flat and hard as stone. "He don't understand you, Mr. Judicious. He can't hear either," Eliza added, piling one lie on top of another. "Deaf and dumb. How convenient." Judicious gathered his reins. "You be careful, Eliza. This is a hard country. It has a way of swallowing up people who keep secrets." He turned his horse. Vole, however, lingered. He spat a stream of tobacco near Casimir's feet. Casimir didn't flinch, but his eyes. Eliza saw it. A deep, cold fire ignited in their depths. It was a look of such profound, controlled hatred that it made Eliza shiver. Vole saw it too. He smirked. "You ain't no mute, are you?" he whispered, too low for Judicious to hear. "I don't know what you are, but I'm going to find out." He nudged his horse and followed his boss. Eliza stood, shaking, until they were small specks in the distance. She turned to Casimir. He was still staring at the spot where Vole had been. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. "Who are you, Casimir?" she whispered to his back. He turned to her, his face a mask of stone. He tapped his own chest, then pointed to her, and then swept his hand in a circle, encompassing the cabin, the pump, the land. He tapped his chest again. "Me. You. Here." It was another promise. "I'm not leaving." The encounter with Judicious and Vole left a poison in the air. The fragile peace of their silent routine was gone, replaced by a thrumming anxiety. They were being watched. Eliza saw Vole twice on the western ridge, a dark silhouette against the setting sun, just sitting on his horse, observing. Casimir saw him too. He responded by working with a grim, focused energy. He repaired the entire fence line, his movements economical and swift. He reinforced the sagging porch and, most worryingly, began scouting the rocky outcrops behind the cabin, his gaze assessing them not for pasture, but for defense. Eliza knew she couldn't put it off any longer. She was down to her last sack of flour and a handful of coffee beans. She had to go to town. "I'm going to Salvation Point," she told Casimir, using a mix of words and gestures. She pointed to the empty flour sack, then made a motion of eating, then pointed down the long, dusty trail. "Town. Supplies." He understood immediately. His face darkened. He shook his head, grabbing her arm. His grip was urgent, not violent. No, danger. "I have to," she insisted, pulling her arm free. "We'll starve otherwise." She pointed to the empty shelf, then her stomach. He wrestled with this, his jaw working. Finally he nodded. He went to the fireplace, retrieved the Winchester, and checked the load. He handed it to her. Eliza's heart twisted. You want me to take it? But what about you?" He tapped his own chest, then pointed to the woodshed where he kept the axe. Then he pointed to his head. "I am smart. I will hide." His eyes met hers, and the promise was clear. "Go. Be safe. Come back." The ride to Salvation Point was 7 miles of simmering dread. Every gust of wind sounded like a horse. Every shadow looked like Silas Vole. The town itself was little more than a single dusty street carved into the desert, anchored by a saloon, a general store, and the sheriff's office. She tied patches outside Greta's Mercantile, the bell above the door jangling her arrival. Greta, the proprietor, was a stern-looking German woman in her 60s who had a surprisingly kind heart. "Eliza, child," Greta said, pushing her spectacles up her nose. "You look thin as a rail. Is that man Judicious still bothering you?" "He's still here, Mrs. Greta," Eliza said, handing over her small list. "He is a snake in the grass," Greta muttered, weighing out a flower. "He thinks because he has the ear of the territorial governor, he can just take. And that foreman of his, Vole. He is a man with no light in his eyes." Eliza nodded, her stomach tight. "I need flour, coffee, salt, and rifle cartridges. 4440. Greta paused. "Trouble?" "Just coyotes," Eliza lied. Greta looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Coyotes? Yes, of course." As Greta gathered the supplies, Eliza's eyes drifted to the notice board by the door. It was covered in land deeds, auction notices, and wanted posters. And one, newly tacked, drew her eye. It wasn't a drawing. It was a poor-quality photograph, a tin-type reproduction. Wanted. 500 reward. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't Casimir, but the text. Wanted for murder, arson, and anarchist agitation. Known associates of the Pikes Peak Miners' Rebellion. There were 3 photographs, and below them a description of a 4th man who had escaped the dragnet. Unknown male, Caucasian, approximately 30 or 35 years, 6 feet, dark hair, speaks no English, believed to be Polish or Russian, considered extremely dangerous. Last seen fleeing south from Colorado after the bombing of the Guggenheim Prosperity Mine. Eliza read the words again and again, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the counter. Polish or Russian. Speaks no English. Extremely dangerous. The bombing of the Prosperity Mine. She'd heard about that. 12 men killed, the owner's office destroyed. They'd blamed it on foreign workers, agitators trying to start a union. "Child, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Greta said, placing the heavy sack of flour on the counter. I'm fine," Eliza stammered. "Just the heat." She paid for her goods, her mind racing. Casimir, a bomb, murder, anarchist. Was she harboring a killer? A man who had blown up a mine and left 12 men to die? His eyes told her every promise. What if they were all lies? What if his gentleness was a mask? His helpfulness a way to gain her trust. The man she'd found wasn't just a lost traveler. He was a fugitive. She packed her supplies onto patches, her movements numb and automatic. As she was about to mount, the doors of the Dusty Spur saloon swung open. Silas Vole stepped out, a half-empty whiskey bottle in his hand. Well, Miss Mayhew," he slurred, his eyes red-rimmed. He clearly hadn't expected to see her. "Look at you, all alone." "Mr. Vole," Eliza said, her voice trembling. She tried to swing her leg over the saddle. He grabbed the horse's bridle. "What's your hurry? Your cousin missing you? Let go of my horse." "I was just talking to the sheriff," Vole said, his voice dropping. "Told him about your guest. He was mighty interested, especially when I mentioned he don't speak American." Eliza's fear was so sharp it tasted like copper. "He's my family. He's done nothing wrong. Ain't he?" Vole leaned closer, his breath hot and foul. "There's a lot of strange folk passing through, folks running from things like bombs in Colorado." Eliza froze. Her reaction, the widening of her eyes, the sharp intake of breath, was all the confirmation he needed. Vole's lips peeled back in a triumphant, ugly grin. "I knew it. I knew I'd seen him. That new poster. That's your man, ain't it? The Polak murderer." "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "Don't you?" He finally let go of the bridle. "You got a terrorist living in your house, Miss Mayhew. A killer. Now, I figured Judicious would pay a lot to know that. And the law, they'd pay a lot, too." He stepped back. "But maybe you and I can come to an arrangement. You get rid of your cousin. Just send him on his way. And you sign that little deed for Mr. Judicious. You do that. And maybe the sheriff don't need to ride out to your place. Is that a threat?" "That, ma'am, is a promise," Vole sneered. "You got 24 hours. You tell that murdering bastard. You tell him Silas Vole is coming, and this time I won't miss." "This time?" Before she could process the implication, he turned and staggered back into the saloon. Eliza mounted her horse, her body numb. She kicked Patches into a gallop, racing away from Salvation Point, the dust of the trail blurring with the hot tears in her eyes. She wasn't just protecting a stranger. She was harboring a wanted murderer. And the man hunting him, Silas Vole, knew exactly who he was. The 7-mile ride back to the High Lonesome was a blur of panic and betrayal. Every rock, every saguaro seemed to mock her. Anarchist, murderer, extremely dangerous. The words from the poster were branded onto her mind. She had been a fool, seduced by a pair of sad blue eyes and a silent, helpful hand. She had mistaken a wolf for a wounded dog. When she rode into the yard, Casimir was on the porch, waiting. He had the axe in his hand, but he relaxed when he saw she was alone. He came forward to take the reins, his face showing clear, simple relief. Eliza recoiled. She slid off the horse, grabbing the Winchester, and backed away from him. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. Casimir stopped, his relief vanishing, replaced by a deep, pained confusion. He held his hands up, palms out. "What's wrong? You!" she spat. "You're a liar!" She fumbled in her saddlebag, not for the supplies, but for the copy of the wanted poster she had ripped from the board when Greta wasn't looking. She threw it at him. It landed in the dust at his feet. "You're a murderer!" she screamed, the words tearing from her throat. "A bomber! You killed people! Men!" He looked at the crumpled paper, then at her. He didn't understand the words, but he understood her terror, her accusation. He bent slowly and picked up the poster. Eliza watched him, her rifle half raised. This was it. The mask would drop. The killer would emerge. He unfolded the paper. He stared at the photographs of the other men. His face, which had been a mask of confusion, contorted. It was not the rage of a killer caught. It was a wave of agonizing, profound grief. His hand went to his mouth, and a sound, a choked sob, escaped him. He looked at the text, his eyes scanning the English words he couldn't read, but he saw the names. He saw Guggenheim, he saw Colorado, and he understood. He looked at Eliza, his eyes full of a desperate, frantic energy. He shook his head. No, no, no. Liar, she cried again. He grabbed her arm, not in anger, but in a plea. He pulled her toward the patch of soft dirt by the woodshed. He dropped to his knees and, with a piece of charcoal from the forge, he began to draw. His hands moved with lightning speed. He drew a line, then another. Branching off. A tunnel. A mine. He drew stick figures, 6 of them, himself included. He pointed to them. Us! Then he drew another figure, separate from the rest. A man in a hat. He made a motion of giving money. A boss. He drew boxes. Dynamite. He pantomimed lighting a fuse, then made a massive gesture of an explosion. Boom! Yes, Eliza whispered, her blood cold. You did it. He shook his head furiously. He pointed to the stick figures, his friends, and made a crossing motion over them. Gone. Dead. Then he pointed to the boss figure. He drew the dynamite next to the boss, not next to his own crew. He pointed at the boss, then at the explosion. He was telling her he didn't set the bomb. The boss did. Why? Eliza asked, her mind struggling to accept it. Why would he kill his own men? Casimir stood. He pantomimed, talking, arguing. He pointed to his crew, then pointed to the walls of the tunnel he had drawn. He made a motion of cracking, of collapsing. He was trying to tell her. They had found something. The mine was unsafe. They had argued with the boss. He then stabbed a finger at the boss drawing, his face a mask of pure hatred. Then he did something that stopped Eliza's heart. He drew the boss again, carefully. A man with a hat and a sneer. And he spoke. Vole. The name was a poisoned dart. Eliza stared. Silas. Vole? Vole was the boss? The foreman? Casimir nodded, his eyes blazing. Yes, Vole. He pointed to himself, then made a running motion. I run. He pointed back at the mine. Vole. Fire. He pointed to his friends, then made the cross gesture again. Dead. The story, brutal and sudden, slammed into Eliza. Casimir and his friends, likely immigrant laborers, had threatened to expose Vley for running an unsafe mine, a mine owned by a massive, powerful company like Guggenheim. Vole, to silence them and cover his tracks, had set the explosion himself, blaming it on his anarchist foreign workers. Casimir was the only one who had escaped. Vole had shot at him as he fled, the wound in his side, and Silas Vole was here, in Arizona, working for Judicious. He recognized you, Eliza breathed, the scene in the yard playing back. Vole's smile. He knew you. He said, this time I won't miss. He's the one who shot you. Casimir nodded, his entire body rigid. And he saw me in town, Eliza said, the full weight of Vole's threat landing on her. He knows. He knows you're here. He gave me 24 hours. To sign the deed over to Judicious. Or he's coming. For you. For me. Casimir listened, his head tilted. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood Judicious, Vole, and the terrible urgency in her voice. He saw the terror in her eyes, the same terror he had felt. He picked up the rifle she had almost dropped. He didn't point it at her. He handed it to her. But first, a gesture of ultimate trust. He then walked to the axe, picked it up, and felt its weight. He turned to face the long trail that led to Judicious's ranch. He looked at Eliza. His eyes were no longer those of a hunted victim. They were the eyes of a man who had lost everything, who had run as far as he could, and who had finally, impossibly, found something new to protect. He couldn't say, "I will not let them harm you." He couldn't say, "This is our land, and we will fight for it." He didn't need to. His eyes, clear and cold as the high desert stars, made the promise for him. Let them come. There was no more talk. There was only work. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Voel's 24 hours were a joke. They both knew he'd come sooner. He'd come with the dark. Casimir became a different person. The quiet, watchful guest was gone, replaced by a field commander. He communicated with sharp, urgent gestures. He pointed to the water pump. Barrels. Fill. Now. While Eliza hauled buckets of water, filling every container she had, to drink and to fight fire, Casimir barricaded the cabin. He dragged the heavy pine table to block the front door. He motioned for her to pull the cot and mattress against the main window. The window," Eliza said, her voice shaky. "We won't be able to shoot." Casimir shook his head. He used the axe to knock a single plank from the wall beside the window, then another on the opposite wall. He was creating firing holes, small and defensible, giving them sight lines to both the front yard and the back. He was a tactician. He took stock of their arsenal, her Winchester, her father's old six-shooter, which she rarely used, the axe, a pitchfork. It was pitiful. He took the six-shooter, checked its action, and tucked it into his belt. He handed her the Winchester. He took the axe for himself. He saw her terror, her trembling hands. He stopped in the midst of the chaos and gripped her shoulders. He looked directly into her eyes. He was not a soft man. He was a man of iron and fire, forged in a place she couldn't imagine, but the look he gave her was one of absolute, grounding calm. He tapped his chest, then hers. "We, together." He tapped his temple, smart, not hard. He was promising her they would outthink them, not outfight them. Dusk settled, and with it came the sound. A low, growing thunder. Not one horse, a dozen. Eliza's breath hitched. She moved to a post, her rifle poking through the small hole. Her knuckles were white. "Miss Mayhew!" Judicius's voice boomed from the darkness. "You've had your time." Eliza didn't answer. "Voel here tells me a very interesting story about the man you're hiding, a murderer, a bomber. The law is on its way from Tucson, but I figure we can handle this ourselves, save the county the trouble." It was a lie. No one was coming. This was a lynching, dressed up as justice. "Give him up, girl," Voel's voice snarled. "Give him up and we'll let you live. We just want him. And the land." Casimir, standing in the center of the dark room, listened. He heard the names Voel and Judicius. He heard the hatred. Eliza's voice was a whisper. "Casimir, He put a finger to his lips. Silence. "No answer," Judicius shouted. "Fine, we'll burn you out." A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof of the porch. The dry wood caught instantly. Eliza screamed. Casimir grabbed the first bucket of water and dashed to the front door. He didn't open it. He flung the water through the gaps in the planks, dousing the nearest flames. A shot rang out. A bullet tore through the door, sinking into the table barricade. Thwack. "They're trying to flush us out," Eliza said, her voice high with panic. Casimir grabbed her arm, pulling her from the firing hole, just as a bullet splintered the wood where her head had been. He pushed her to the other side of the room. He was furious, not at her, but at the bullet. He pointed. "Move! Stay low." Another torch hit the side of the cabin. The dry planks began to smolder. This was their plan. Not a siege, but an execution. Casimir looked at the remaining barrels of water. He looked at the fire. He knew they couldn't fight both. He had to make a choice. He ran to the back wall, near the kitchen hearth. He pointed at the Winchester, then at the front. "Cover me." "What? What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He gripped the axe, took a deep breath, and began to chop at the back wall of the cabin. "Casimir! No! That's—" Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound of the axe was deafening, a counter-rhythm to the gunfire outside. He was cutting a new door. "They'll see you! They'll hear you!" He knew. He was counting on it. He was creating a diversion, a second front. "He's in the back!" Vole shouted. "He's trying to run! Half of you, circle around!" Eliza heard the men splitting up. The gunfire at the front lessened. Casimir smashed a hole big enough to crawl through. He looked at Eliza. He pointed at the hole, then at the rocky outcrops in the darkness, 50 yards behind the cabin. "Go, run!" I'm not leaving you!" He snarled at her, a sound of such fierce command that she flinched. He shoved the rifle into her hands. "Go!" He was sacrificing himself. He would draw their fire while she escaped. "No!" Eliza chambered around and fired through the front slit at the shadow of a man near the porch. A scream tore the night. She'd hit one. "Damn it, she's armed!" Judicious roared. The brief moment of triumph was shattered. Casimir, seeing her refusal, changed his plan. He grabbed her, dragged her to the hole he'd made, and threw her through it. He tumbled out after her, landing hard on the dusty ground. "They're out!" Vole screamed. Bullets ripped through the night air. The zing of ricochets off the rocks was terrifying. "This way!" Eliza yelled, grabbing his hand. She knew this land. He didn't. She pulled him toward the narrow game trail that led up to the high rocks. It was their only chance. They scrambled up the loose scree, rocks clattering, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The cabin was now fully ablaze, a massive beacon of orange against the black sky, illuminating them. They were perfect targets. "There!" a man yelled. A bullet struck the rock by Casimir's head, spraying his face with stone fragments. He grunted, stumbling. I can't!" Eliza sobbed, her legs failing. Casimir didn't stop. He grabbed her around the waist, half carrying, half dragging her. He shoved her behind a large cluster of boulders, a small, natural fortress. He pushed her down and took the rifle from her shaking hands. He checked the remaining rounds. 3. He had the rifle. She had the 6-shooter. He had his axe. Vole, judicious, and at least 5 other men were at the base of the rocks. They were trapped. "End of the line, Polak!" Vole yelled, his voice echoing up the rocks. "You should have kept running all the way to Mexico." Casimir peered over the rock. He saw them, shadows moving between the boulders below. He lined up a shot. "You're a dead man, Vole!" Eliza screamed, her voice cracking with a mix of terror and pure, undiluted rage. "Is that right?" Vole laughed. "Your boyfriend there, he knows how this ends. He watched his friends burn in Colorado. Now he gets to watch you burn." Casimir's hand tightened on the rifle. He looked at Eliza, his face grim in the firelight. He held up 3 fingers. 3 bullets. He then tapped his chest. 1. He pointed at Vole. For him. He held up the other 2. For them. He left one unspoken. The last one. Eliza understood. The last one is for me. Or for him. He was promising her they would not be taken. He turned back to the darkness, raised the rifle, and took a slow, steady breath. The hunter, cornered, had become the hunter again. The night grew cold. The fire from the cabin had died down to a pulsing, hellish glow, casting long, dancing shadows. The men below were quiet, but they were there. They were waiting for the dawn, when Eliza and Casimir would be easy targets. Eliza shivered, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a bone-deep chill. She was huddled between two boulders, the six-shooter heavy and useless in her lap. Her home was gone. Her life was a ruin of smoking ash. Casimir sat 3 feet away, a living statue. He was pressed against the rock, the Winchester resting across his knees. He hadn't moved in an hour. He was listening. They're just waiting, Eliza whispered, her teeth chattering. Casimir gave a short, sharp nod. He knew. We have 3 bullets, she said, stating the obvious. They have so many. He turned his head to look at her. The firelight flickered in his eyes. He saw her despair. He saw her shivering. Without a word, he unbuttoned the coarse linen shirt he wore. Underneath, he was bare-chested, his skin pale over a lattice of hard muscle. He held the shirt out to her. No, she whispered. You'll freeze. He didn't argue. He just held it out, his gaze insistent. Take it. She finally did, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm. She wrapped the thick, rough-spun shirt around her shoulders. It smelled of him, of wood smoke, sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of the forge. It was comforting. He sat back, his bare chest gleaming in the red light. The cold didn't seem to touch him. A long silence stretched, broken only by the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Why? Eliza whispered, mostly to herself. Why did you stay? You could have run. You could have been halfway to Mexico. Casimir heard her, though he didn't understand the words. He understood the question. He reached into the pocket of his trousers, the ones she had mended for him. He pulled out a small, dark object. He held it out to her. It was a bird, carved from a single piece of dark wood, a hawk, or maybe an eagle. The detail was exquisite. Every feather was defined, the tiny head cocked, the eyes sharp. You made this, she breathed, taking it. It was smooth, worn by the touch of his hands. He nodded. He had made it in the woodshed, in the brief, quiet moments of the last few days. He tapped the bird, then pointed to her. For you. It's beautiful, she said, tears welling. He then reached into his boot, his movements slow. He pulled out a small, worn leather wallet, wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it with care. From it, he took a photograph, a small, cracked tintype. He handed it to her. Eliza held it to the firelight. It was a woman, a young woman with a round, gentle face and dark, braided hair. She was holding a small child, a baby, wrapped in blankets. They were his family. Eliza's heart, which she thought was too numb to feel any more pain, broke. She's beautiful, Casimir. Your wife? Your son? He watched her face, reading her understanding. He nodded. Wife? Son? Where are they? Eliza asked, already dreading the answer. Are they back in your country? He held her gaze. He slowly, deliberately, raised his hand and made the sign of the cross over his chest. Then he pointed to the ground. Oh, God, Eliza whispered. No. He pointed to his wife in the photo, then touched his own throat, and made a gesture of coughing, of terrible sickness. Fever. He pointed to the baby. Same. He made a gesture of a boat on water. The journey. They died on the journey over. He hadn't run from Colorado just to save himself. He had run because he had absolutely nothing left in the world to lose. He had arrived in this new country with a promise of a new life, and it had given him nothing but death, fire, and betrayal. Until he washed up at her creek. Eliza looked at him, truly seeing the fathomless depth of his loss. They were the same. Two people, hollowed out by grief, clinging to a patch of dirt. I'm so sorry, she whispered. She handed the photo back. He wrapped it with a lover's care and tucked it back into his boot. He then gave her a look. A new look, not of protection, not of strategy. It was a look of raw, unshielded connection. He had shown her the one thing he had left. He trusted her with his ghosts. A new sound came from below, a scraping, a low murmur. Casimir was instantly alert. He peered over the rock. The men were moving, not for an assault, but one was crawling away, back toward the ranch. "What is he doing?" Eliza whispered. Casimir watched, his eyes narrowing. The man reached the ruined yard. He was going to the well. No, not the well. He was going to the woodshed, the one part of the property that hadn't fully burned. "What's in the shed?" Casimir's face went rigid. He looked at Eliza, his eyes wide with a new, sudden horror. Eliza thought, "Nothing? Tools, some of my father's old." Her voice died. Oh no. Her father had been a part-time prospector. He kept a small, locked box in that shed. A box filled with dynamite. Old, sweating, unstable dynamite. Vole hadn't just been a mine foreman. He was an explosives expert. "He's not waiting for dawn," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "He's going to blow us off the mountain." Casimir grabbed the rifle. He had to stop that man. He had 3 bullets. It was a 50-yard shot in the dark at a moving target. He lined up the shot. He let out a slow breath. He was calm. He was a man who had faced death a dozen times. But before he could pull the trigger, a voice cut through the air. "Volo!" It was Casimir. His voice was not a yell. It was a roar, a sound of pure, concentrated fury, a name ripped from his own language. Vole. Down below, the man with the dynamite froze. Vole himself, at the base of the rocks, stepped out from behind his cover, stunned. "What the—" Bang! Casimir fired, not at the man in the shed, at Vole. The bullet struck the rock right next to Vole's head, sending a spray of granite chips into his face. Vole screamed and dove back, but the shot had done its work. The men were exposed, their attention diverted, and then Casimir did the last thing Eliza expected. He stood up. In the full red glow of the dying fire, he stood on the rock, his bare chest a clear target. He roared at them, a string of harsh foreign words. It was a challenge, a curse, a final defiant stand. "He's crazy!" One of the men yelled. "Shoot him!" A volley of gunfire erupted. Bullets snapped through the air. Casimir didn't flinch. He just stood there, a spectre of vengeance. And as he stood, he spoke, not in his language, in English, broken, jagged, raw, but unmistakable. "Vole!" he yelled, his voice cracking from disuse. "You burn mine! You kill my friends!" Silence. Absolute, stunned silence from below. Even the gunfire stopped. Vole, Judicious, their men, they all heard it. The mute could speak. The silence that followed Casimir's words was absolute. Vole, his face pale, realized the mute was not just a survivor. He was a witness. "He speaks!" Judicious shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. "Vole, you idiot! You told me he was a dumb animal! Kill him! Kill them both! Now!" The gunmen raised their rifles, but they hesitated. This was no longer bullying a homesteader. This was silencing a witness to murder. "I ain't hanging for this," one of the men muttered, lowering his gun. Seeing his power evaporate, Vole became a cornered animal. He had to erase everyone. "I'll do it myself," he snarled, sprinting toward the woodshed and the box of old dynamite. "He's going for the box!" Eliza screamed. Casimir didn't hesitate. He had 2 bullets left. He didn't aim for the running shadow. He aimed for the shed. He fired twice, the bullets striking the old metal lock on the dynamite box. The world vanished in a white-orange flash. The unstable dynamite detonated, vaporizing Vole instantly. The shockwave threw Eliza and Casimir back as shrapnel tore through the yard. Barnaby Judicious, struck in the chest by a piece of the flying anvil, collapsed, dead. The remaining men, screaming in terror, fled into the pre-dawn darkness. As the sun rose, they climbed down into the smoking ruins. Her home was gone. Eliza stood in the ashes and began to cry. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Casimir. He looked at the ruin, then at her. He didn't have the words for "we will rebuild," but he used the ones he had. "Eliza," he said, his voice raw. He pointed to the smoking dirt beneath their feet. "Home." He pointed to himself, then to her, and placed his hand over his heart. "Our home." Eliza looked into his eyes and took his hand. The promises were still there, clear as the sunrise. She saw their future. "Thank you for listening to this story. They rebuilt. It took years, but the high lonesome ranch rose from the ashes, and the territory slowly forgot the names Judicious and Vole." Casimir never learned to speak perfect English, and Eliza never learned Polish. But they built their own language from wood, water, and trust. The promises he made with his eyes, he kept with his hands. If you were moved by the story of Eliza and Casimir, and if you believe that true connection is more than just words, please take a second to hit that like button. It tells us you want more stories of survival and unlikely love. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that courage can speak any language. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss another story from the heart of the Old West. We'll see you in the next one.